If you were to believe the headlines or the hype, in just under a fortnight, Australia will reopen to the world. Outbound travel will have no strings attached and international tourists will return to Australia. Unfortunately, that's not the case.
People, returning Australians, tourists who want to come back, who want to visit Australia, who want to come into Sydney, hotel quarantine will be a thing of the past. We are opening Sydney and New South Wales to the world.
As you saw there, newly minted New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet implied that travel to New South Wales would be available to all fully vaccinated international travellers. But what happens come November 1 is far more nuanced.
That this is about Australian residents and citizens first.
Hours later, Prime Minister Scott Morrison was forced to clarify, if overrule, several critical details.
Good afternoon. The Commonwealth Government has made no decision to allow other visa holders, skilled visa holders, student visa holders, international visitors travelling under an ETA or other international visa arrangement, visiting visa arrangement, to come into Australia under these arrangements. They are decisions for the Commonwealth Government, as the Premier and I know.
Far from being a free-for-all, the Prime Minister says flights will be restricted to Australian citizens, residents and their immediate family.
We also agreed that we would be looking at expanding the definition of immediate family to include the parents of Australian residents and citizens. Now, in New South Wales' case, that means that those family members will be able to come into Sydney if they are vaccinated and not have to quarantine under the arrangements that the Premier has announced today.
Crucially, they must be double vaccinated and test negative before boarding.
So this is further demonstration of Australians getting vaccinated is enabling them to do more and more and more.
Fortress Australia will fall in stages, though the timeline is unclear. Migrants are next, as well as those with work or study visas. Then the so-called challenge of tourists. The announcement was littered with vagaries and contradictions from both government and media. Queensland's government was reportedly blindsided by the curveball announcement.
There's just been an enormous change this morning that I haven't been able to get my head around.
WA Premier Mark McGowan says the announcement of quarantine-free international travel for all Australians could delay his state's border reopening.
Who's furious?
Locals, people are furious that they can go to London, but they can't come to WA.
Look, it's very unclear what exactly has happened in New South Wales, but it's obviously not in accordance with the national plan, what is going on over there. It's probably just as safe overseas as it is in New South Wales. But Western Australia is in a very different position. We don't have any COVID. We don't have any lockdowns. We don't have any restrictions. But if we get cases, obviously, then we'll have to put in place restrictions and rules and potentially lockdowns, and people get sick and some people will die.
Both Queensland and WA are yet to set a date to reopen their interstate borders.
So we basically don't let anyone in from New South Wales at this point in time because it is an extreme risk jurisdiction.
So how will quarantine-free travel differ in states with lower vaccination rates than New South Wales? Scott Morrison says for these states, arrivals will be capped. A controversial coronavirus countermeasure, Australia's closed borders have curtailed infections and splintered families. Imposed in March of 2020, the Commonwealth didn't hesitate shutting the country's international border during the early days of the pandemic. Late last year, 6 News spoke to Californian woman Kelly Burns. In a long-distance relationship with her New South Wales partner, Australia's tough border rules meant they hadn't seen each other in more than a year. The international border upending her plan to move here long-term.
There's no update, there's no timeline, there's nothing that we're given that, okay, we're going to bring temporary visa holders back into Australia on this date, or here's your game plan. It's like we just don't even exist, which is really frustrating.
This will come as welcome news. While it's not quite unrestricted travel, it's certainly a light at the end of the tunnel for the tourism industry and the thousands stranded or separated.